this is something that was not in there, it's one of my recommended additions later on, is that they will get a measurement point near their house when the sound study is done to actually measure it. There are some places that have written into the ordinance that if somebody files a complaint, that a sound study will be done for that particular location. If it's over, the wind project pays for it. If it's under,
Let's keep getting into a hypothetical, and I don't want to beat this to death.
well, no, that's an actual ordinance from one place.
But if today, 35 decibels may take it out to 1,800 feet. Or
Well,
whatever.
yeah.
5 years from now, it may take it into 1,500. And of course, you have the safety margins and things, but I mean, granted, you got this creep as technology increases. So,
Well, right. I mean, I think that I mean, clearly, well, one of the things here is everybody understands 4,000 feet, not because they can see it and they can feel it, okay, and they can look at it on the map and know it. But the 35 decibels or anything like that, any sound wave, is something that's a line on a map that nobody can see, nobody can feel, and the average person can't measure. I mean, they can hire a surveyor and or look at an aerial photo or look on Google Earth and figure out what 4,000 feet is. Okay, they can't look on Google Earth and figure out what 35
Right,
decibels is.
except it is totally arbitrary and it really has nothing to do, but again, I left it in, I didn't.
Well, no, I know. Well, I was trying to make a little bit of a point here because I think that there should be, even though like from a scientific perspective, okay, I totally agree with you, but on a social perspective, you have to take other things into consideration, okay? And so, is 4,000 feet, socially, politically, appropriate? Or could an argument be constructed that was reasonable socially and politically for 2,000 feet, given the more conservative, much more conservative actually, sound standards that we're actually proposing together? Because especially if we adopt a DVG standard, I mean, I could get my head wrapped around this, but if we don't go with the DVG standard, or we don't go down to 35 decibels, I could not get my head wrapped around this at all. I mean, because it's not gonna, I can't do it. But I mean, if we're gonna go with more conservative sound standards, I could be convinced to go with lesser distance requirements, socially and politically, but there are gonna have to be some pretty strong.
The only thing about, and what makes the 4,000 feet arbitrary is, at this time, that's not too far off in most places where you're going to be at probably 35. You're probably not too far off. Again, you take a look at the maps I've seen, they go in and out, especially in hilly terrain. There are spots.
So really, if we leave it at 4,000 feet the way it is, we're gonna be hitting 35 roughly anyway.
Well, yeah, we already found out that we hit it before.
Well, I don't remember what it is. I don't keep that. I have other things to think about besides all plants.
We hit it before that on this one, but again, I've been looking at sound maps from a bunch of different sites. And again, depending on the terrain of the site, almost all of them get under 35 within 4,000 feet.
Right, so basically then what you're saying is you're actually bringing us back to full circle on this, that 4,000 feet might not be an unreasonable place to be.
No, it's probably not an unreasonable place to be. The one thing that doesn't take into account is in the future, as turbines are getting quieter, you've now arbitrarily set them out at 4,000 feet when
Right, but then you
10
can have somebody,
10
then you
years
can
from now,
have,
they
then you
may
can
not
have
be
some
30.
five poor schmucks on a planning board sitting here having this conversation as to why you can make it less than 4,000 feet.
Right.
And it won't be our
Well,
problem.
that's why I didn't pull it. That's why I didn't take it out. I left it in at this
So,
time.
I think we're gonna keep it at 4,000 feet, thanks
Yeah.
Pete.
It's just, the plain fact is, even though we've left it there, it has more to do with politics than it does with
I know, but
for safety.
but this
Right.
is something that's technology, 5 years
Right.
from now, we could reevaluate.
We just have 5 people sitting around the table and figure it out.
Yeah,
But the other thing though is, even though yes, there's some politics involved with 4,000 feet. However, you just admitted that for the most part, for most of the studies, we're hitting 35 around 4,000 feet. So from a science perspective, it's not perfect, but it's reasonable.
Yeah.
So, and it's understandable.
Yeah.
So I don't think I think actually we do have, if somebody who wanted to come in and be just a scientist about the whole thing, we actually could, from a physical science perspective, justify 4,000 feet based on what you just said.
Yeah. And, you've got people that are recommending minimum 2-mile distances. But they are also based on some really, let's put it this way, you're getting out there when you're recommending the 2 miles, and in many cases you're talking about people who don't want to ever be annoyed or ever hear it, period.
I still think we should be looking at, I don't want to underestimate looking at that G value, so I would like people to really take a good look at that this month. Because we already have this low sound frequency standard in the ordinance now, okay? And people seem to be concerned about low frequency sounds. So if there is some evidence that we can use that's reasonable, that in the DBG realm, I'm not saying we should do it, I'm saying we should read about it and be able to talk intelligently about it in 30 days.
Yeah, I'll send you the links to the various sources. I'll tell you, it's dry reading.
Sure it is.
No, you don't. No, that's funny. It's not Tom Clancy, that's for sure.
Yeah, it's dry. You've already found out from what I yeah. And wrapping your head around it, and the conflicting opinions from both sides, that's where you get into real.
Okay,
And,
let's roll.
okay. And remember, Woodchuck Hill was being removed. It was removed.
It was already removed.
Yeah, so I don't know why I copied here, so I had it. And most of the rest of these requirements saw no reason to make any changes.
Yeah.
That's all you get in the appendix.
Well, the appendix is something else. Construction standards, blasting,
We already moved those are all.
well, this is actually saying all blasting shall be in conformity with the submitted blasting plan. And your section 6 and the earlier part we took out of this said you had to submit a blasting plan.
Okay, all right, I said this is a performance standard,
This is a performance standard,
not a submission requirement, got it.
not a submission requirement, exactly. So most of this is all just the same performance standards. Here's your section of mitigation waivers. I saw no reason to change any of that. The modifications and changes. Everybody can take a look if they want to change these. I didn't see anything. The other things for an operational permit. Our inspections, violations, complaints, penalties, and
Bill.
appeals.
30 MSR,
Got that, thanks.
Complaints, appeals,
Wait, stop on the complaint. Okay, well, obviously I have to change the articles and stuff later.
the appendix. Okay, and some of this is going to get, this is going to be the section that in particular I'll be submitting to Hessler to look for anything we have technically incorrect. Because this is the part that gets into all the technical aspects.
Right.
The first thing is, I took out this section for, and if everybody agrees, with IEC 61400-11, except for the presence of tones, because like I say, it really is not, this, Hessler and several other sources basically say the only thing IEC 61400-11 is really appropriate for, and it was designed for, was measuring the sound power.
So we're just gonna use a different requirement.
We're going to use a different requirement. The next thing was instrumentation. This required all of it to be, used to be called Type 1, and the literature is now, the new terminology is Class 1.
Okay, well, this is my question on instrumentation. I mean, this gets down to like really minutial micromanagement. If they're in conformance with the ANSI requirement, the question is, would that imply that the correct instrumentation was used?
That's what I'll let Hessler comment on.
Right, because, you know, I just don't see that it's useful. I mean, that would be like telling a carpenter that he had to use, you know, a particular type of square or level to make the building level.
Well, if Hessler says that if all we do is call on a particular standard, it covers this, then we can eliminate it from here.
Right.
The reason I made this change right here was, what you've got here is it did require only Class 1 instruments, or Type 1 instruments. Type 1 instruments are in general laboratory grade instruments with a 0.7 dB margin of error.
Well, I would just, let's defer this section to Haskell then, because I'm
Okay.
not gonna even have a discussion about this, because I'm not qualified to have a discussion.
Okay, well, again, I'm going by some of his
Right, well,
stuff and
let's
others,
just
and
let
stuff
him-
he's published.
spec this stuff out for us.
Okay, well, you need to know though why I wanted to also allow Class 2. Class 2, the difference is from 0.7 dB tolerance to 1 dB tolerance. 0.3 of a dB on a logarithmic scale. It's inconsequential. But, as Hessler has put it, he says, getting enough Class 1 instruments for all your measurement points, if you want to specify a lot of measurement points, may be very difficult. They're expensive. You can only even rent so many of them. And not only that, the Class 1s are finicky. Class 2s are more rugged, they're made for field use.
Is that what you got?
That mine's a Class 2, yeah. And the difference in precision is inconsequential.
What is yours, about a 1.5 dB?
No, 1.
Yours is a 1
Is
dB?
1. So anyway, there's very little difference. But, so why specify just the ones when...
Well, again, I would just, let's see what he has to say about it in terms of
Well, I pulled a lot of this right out of his,
stuff.
I pulled a lot of this out of that report that was done for Minnesota on recommendations.
No.
Yes, that was a link that I did
read
send
that
everybody. Yeah. The next thing is I went with is his recommendation, the sound level meters should be fitted with oversized or greater wind screens, not with the manufacturer's recommended. That cuts down on the wind error significantly. Ours specified only the manufacturer's suggested, which means they actually would have had more error. The next thing is, ours required ANSI S12.3 Pt4 for a lot of our requirements. The Pt4 is a very specific set of measurement techniques that are entirely inappropriate to be used with wind turbines. They're designed for short term, meaning you're supposed to take all of the measurements in only a few hours, which means if you're there on a windy day, well, guess what? Because of all the extraneous noises, the developer gets the advantage. If you're there on a super quiet day, he gets a disadvantage. What is being recommended now is long-term measurements, where you're averaging and you're looking at the conditions over a longer term. But that Pt4 actually, if you read the description in it, it says these measurements should all be made in just a few hours and be done with it. That works pretty good if you're picking a calm day to be measuring the output from, say, like the Perk plant or from the power plant there is easy. You pick a really calm day, and yeah, you can do those type of measurements in just a few hours at most.
So actually what you're really saying is that the way it's set up now, it could theoretically be very much of a gamed evaluation.
Either way.
However, if you did it the way that we're proposing to do it, it would be much more difficult to game it, and the results would be accurate and more long-term.
Exactly,
Okay, next.
and that's what we're doing. Okay. Now, there is a Pt2 to that standard. I'm waiting for Hessler to get back to me to see if we should be talking about using Pt2. Okay, I did not change a lot of this, but again, some of this is going to be reviewed. And this pad here is where I changed it for what is now recommended for the test being done, not only those few hours which Pt3 recommended, but Hessler himself recommended 14 days at a minimum.
And how are we doing it now?
That's what I changed it to, for will be required to be done for 14 days. And the exact wording on this, I'm going to have him recommending whether or not we need to be doing some changes.
So we didn't even specify, we just said over long periods, and who knows what longer periods are.
Right, and while we said over longer periods, Pt3 says only over a few hours. So we had a built-in problem right there as well. We were telling them to do one thing in one paragraph and something else somewhere else. We need to get that straightened out. Okay. Now, another change, I changed the measurement height for it based on Hessler's recommendations, again, to cut down on wind contamination.
Well, I mean, again, to me, I'm not quite sure that we need to say 1 to 2 meters above the ground. We need to say ANSI S12.9. And then if it says, if they change that to 1.7 meters, ours won't say 1 meter.
No, you can specify different standards in the ordinance, and Hessler recommends that in this long thing that he wrote about guidelines, saying that the ANSI standards, asking for it to be higher, adds to the sound contamination, which means you're not getting as good a readings as you should have.
So we want to say the ANSI standards with the following, and then list
Right,
exceptions.
this is an exception to it.
Right, so I just put, it would be good then to make it clear then, ANSI standard, and then maybe to this ANSI
One of
standard,
the
and then
one of the
have,
paragraphs
list of
up above already
exceptions.
says that,
okay.
that,
But it'd just be good to consolidate all the exceptions, because it's just
Yep.
very difficult to track this stuff.
well, a lot of these are consolidated right here.
So it's 1 to 1.1.
So I'll be looking at it, I'll be looking for this table for you, Bruce, as exceptions and standards, right? Just need to go more.
Okay. And then again, the oversized windscreens. For data collection.
If we, just for the record, for these other standards that we're deviating from the ANSI from, I want those footnoted too.
Okay,
Oh, it's because it would be too, I don't want down the road, I mean, just picture this, 2 years or 3 years from now, somebody thinking, where did this come from?
okay, well, that's easy enough to do. Well, and the plain fact is, let's be very honest, as they keep learning more about this, the recommendations here, a lot of them that have come out in the last 2 years, are completely different from 5 years ago. Those are completely different if you look at stuff from 10 years ago. This is changing, it's still changing, and what I've done mostly is go with the more conservative recommendations. I think if you've read some of that, you can see that's pretty much what I've been pulling, is the more conservative, not.
Okay.
Especially with the
changing signs on it, I mean, it lessens the town's risk.
Right, I mean, I can supply you with 10 peer-reviewed studies that say, don't even worry about the low-frequency sound or the infrasound. I'm accepting the fact, though, that there are people that have problems and that we should still address it
Right.
as being more conservative. But I can supply you with a half dozen peer-reviewed studies that say, you're foolish for even considering it. Well, there are people that are having problems. Okay, the general narrative description. Okay. Your Pt4 actually called for a narrative description of intermittent sounds registered during each measurement. It is next to impossible to do.
Well, one interpretation of what a narrative is, we found out can be way from one end of the spectrum
If
to
you're
another.
taking, as this would call for, several thousand measurements to be averaging out to find out what you have for a
We'd
value,
have to have an author or
yeah.
to write a narrative or.
Anyway, so a lot of this is and I changed the wording on determining post-construction values. The consultant should assume worst-case conditions. Basically, the assumed wind speed shall be the speed that results in the worst case. That worst-case conditions can be interpreted in 50 different ways, including, well, you didn't take into account when there's a 60-mile-an-hour wind. Well, guess what? It won't be running at a 60-mile-an-hour. But people can say, well, that's worst case. What we're interested in is what produces the worst sound. So that's why I adjusted this wording to.
What do you mean, worst sound or highest sound?
It's defined as the highest.
Okay.
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 Okay. And again, we've just said we would not have, I'll have to take some more wording out, so we've gone with just one season. But I did leave in the back describing, and we can add right there, suggested times between December 1st and, what'd you say?
Like April 1st. I think pretty much everybody agrees that the leaves aren't out before April 1st around here.
Yeah, even a little later than that.
Right. So I mean, if you gave them a guide, they'd be pretty safe and it would be fairly indisputable.
Yep. Okay, and then I added underneath here, in all cases, predictions shall be based on the highest levels of sound power produced by the wind turbines. That's basically just restating what we've already stated. The third octave levels, because that's what we'll also be going by for, let's see, go back up. Requiring them to supply the 1/3 octave bands, because that will tell us if there are any tones. And one of the problems with that tone measurement that was specified in that other standard is no one except the sound engineer with specific knowledge in computer programs could either run the data or do it. The EPA and DEP standard, which I'm still thinking we should tighten up the standard a little bit, but anybody can take a look at the numbers and say that does or doesn't. Okay. I took out the isocontour maps for pre-construction background sound, since they are effectively impossible to produce accurately.
Question on that now, is Hessler say they're never done on pre-construction anywhere in the United States? I mean,
in the United States, so I can't even find an example in a foreign country.
Well, I mean, that's what I'm asking is, I believe one of the terms used, at least reading some of the historical record, was it's impossible.
Well, the
Does that mean
word, the
they're never
word there
done?
is, it's for all practical purposes impossible. Anything is possible if you want to spend enough.
Yeah, let me rephrase the question. Are they not done on wind turbine projects? in the
They're
United
not
States?
done.
They're not done on cities' noise projects. If you go into, like, I went and pulled a project down for studying sound in New York City and San Francisco harbors, those links I sent out a few weeks ago, and the first thing that the consultants pointed out were go in and get and measure the sound being generated by a particular warehouse, and then you put that in. Then you go in and measure the sound being generated by the traffic on the street, and then you put that in. And then you basically make a model that every one of them has a point source. So the question, the issue here with these ISO contours is, what's your point source? Because you have to have, that's a point source. I mean, what sound was that thing making when it's sitting there?
I understand that, and I know that it's been a great debate. It's semantics more than anything. Say it's impossible. Does that mean it's never done on wind
It's
farm?
never done.
It's never
It's
done
never
in sound
done.
studies for
It's
urban
just the
setting, 'cause
verbiage.
it's not done.
I wanted more of an absolute. In other words, it's an error.
It's an error.
It's an error.
Okay.
Don't know who came up with the idea, but it's an error.
Okay. It's not done.
It's not
It's
done
not a generally accepted process.
Can't be.
because it's meaningless.
Well, yeah, but it can't be, like, how could it be done?
Well, I don't know. I'm not a sound engineer, but it's in the rules. Somewhere somebody put it in here.
Well, it's like a lot of ideas that people sometimes come up with. They sound good when you come up with them, and then you find out afterwards, whoops.
It makes sense. I mean, what I was mentioning a couple hours ago about how it seems like some of these standards, they took like drainage and grading standards and then just inserted the word sound for water. Because clearly, if you were doing building a building, you would go in and you'd measure all the contours, and because the source of the contours is sea level.
So it's being deleted because it's an error. It's not done as a generally accepted process for
Right.
wind turbine
Period.
project.
Right.
Not just
It's
for
an
wind
error.
turbines, for anything. Not for ambient sound.
Okay.
Not for ambient sound. So let's clarify there exactly. Not for ambient sound,
Right,
because there's no source for ambient sound.
right. So there's no way to, you could do it for this minute if you had enough measurement points. You could do it for this minute. Do the same thing tomorrow, all the things that made the sound have moved. It's not the same, it's different. That's why it's meaningless. That's why you're trying to go with that L90A background sound, and even that's just it's a representation at this time, and that's
Yeah.
why you don't use that for the project. You don't use that pre-construction ambient study for compliance afterwards, because as time goes on, conditions change. More traffic on roads, different animals, as things change, that background sound will change over time as well. Okay.
It says a total of 2 ISO contour maps. What's that? That should go 2, right?
Okay, no. Right now, for the
Post-construction, okay.
post-construction sound.
Would it be just one then?
Right.
Well, I haven't taken out the one for the sea level, I don't believe, yet. Because, again, until we decide for sure what we're doing with the low frequency sound,
All right.
so I've left the 2 in there, but depending on what we decide to do on low frequency sound, that second one is gonna get changed.
Right.
Your A level tells you what people are going to hear average. Whether we do something with one for the low frequency sound as well, if we put in a low frequency standard, we're probably going to want one on that low frequency sound. So I left it in there as 2, but, okay. And the next one was that one about the LA minus the LC, okay. LEQ A post minus LEQ pre, and I took that out because if you can't produce the ones for the pre sound in the first place, and you can't produce one using that as the input.
Yeah.
The next standard I added in or 1.5 miles, whichever is greater. If we take out the DBC and change it to something else, we're going to be changing that.
Okay.
But a minimum of 1.5 miles. And going down to 30 dBA, and again, we'll see what happens on the low frequency sound standard.
We've already got that, yeah.
And then number 6, so why are we asking it here? Okay, now for the post-construction. I already went into the reasons for for wanting to change, and that it turns out that the suggested method has a built-in bias, and you can't tell ahead of time whether the bias is in favor or against. The project.
So we're not saying we're not gonna do any post-construction sound measurement,
Oh,
we're saying we're
we're
doing it a different way.
We're gonna do it a different way.
Okay.
And what I have stuck in at this point is I took the entire thing that Hessler has written in that M study. I added a couple extra things from our originals, but I basically stuck that all in. And I want his comments on it, on whether or not he thinks that the way he wrote it in that is basically regulatory for putting in an ordinance, or if you would change some of the wording for use in an ordinance.
Over here.
And right at the beginning is his explanation for why